I thought I might get a nasty email from the mob across the road because of my sermon or address title this morning. Let's get rid of the kingdom of God. But I haven't heard anything yet. So, as a small boy in Ballarat in 1953, I can remember sitting around the radio with my family listening to the coronation service of Queen Elizabeth II. No one back then, of course, would have even predicted that she would still be on the throne today, sovereign of her kingdom, 65 years later. And looking back into ancient Roman times, to be a Caesar meant that you were king, because that's what Caesar means in Latin. In German, of course, it's Kaiser. Sometimes it did not mean that you would reach old age if you were Caesar. Julius Caesar, who ruled from 100 BCE until 44 BCE, was murdered, of course, by the Roman senators. Augustus, who was born Octavian and was adopted by his uncle Julius Caesar, ruled from 27 BCE until 14 CE. And in January 27, he was called Imperator Caesar Divi Filius Augustus, which meant Emperor, King, Son of God, Augustus. When his uncle was assassinated, Octavian, later becoming Augustus, raised an army, and in 31 BCE, at the Battle of Actium, he defeated the last of his opponents, Mark Antony, and then took control of Rome. This was peace through violence, to use Dominic Crossan's term, and Augustus died of natural causes in 14 CE. Tiberius then ruled from 14 CE until 37 CE and died a natural death. Caligula ruled from 37 CE until 41 CE and was murdered by his own soldiers. Claudius ruled from 41 until 54 CE and was poisoned. Nero, from 54 to 68 CE, committed suicide. Galba, from 68 to 69 CE, was lynched by his own soldiers. And Vitellius, December 69 to the following year, was also lynched by his own soldiers. And Otho died by suicide. So you can see, being Caesar in those days was a pretty tumultuous occupation. But it was also part of the background to the writers of the Gospels who put the words, the kingdom of God, into Jesus' mouth. The phrase kingdom of God or kingdom of heaven, as in Matthew's Gospel, occurs over 140 times in the Gospels, mainly in the synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark and Luke. Among scholars who question the authenticity of what Jesus did or did not say, many of the statements by Jesus about the kingdom are considered to be authentic. The actual historical meaning of the kingdom of God also further confuses us by the language that we popularly use. In English, of course, the word kingdom is masculine, while the Gospels, written in Greek, use the word basileia, which is feminine. Some scholars have assumed that Jesus spoke Greek, however, his native language was a version of Aramaic, and in Aramaic, a likely translation of kingdom is Malkuta, which also is feminine. The emphasis of feminine words suggests that Jesus used the word kingdom with a very different meaning from our accepted conventional Western understanding of the word kingdom. Kingdom denotes royal power and dominion, privilege, exclusion and hierarchical control, whereas the feminine emphasis used by Jesus point to something far more egalitarian, liberating and empowering, a quality of leadership that enables and empowers others to action the next step. Kings and the governance that went with being king at the time of Jesus were considered normative, not just culturally and politically, but in religious terms as well. The king was considered to be the primary representative of God on earth. And because Christianity, for much of its history, colluded with kingly power and fortune and patriarchal kingship, it has taken many centuries to come to terms with the countercultural impact of Jesus, who rejected it in a forthright way, the kingly model, and rather offering instead a radical alternative characterised by empowerment from the bottom up rather than from the top down. So things began to go wrong from a fairly early age, according to Robert Funk of the Jesus Seminar. The early followers of Jesus began to think within a few centuries of the following equation: the kingdom equals the church. Another problem occurred in the 4th century when Constantine adopted Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire, and by declaring Jesus as Pantocrator, ruler of the universe, which meant that Jesus was brought under the bar of imperial earthly governance, effectively suppressing for several centuries the countercultural vision of Jesus of the upside-down kingdom. The chief theme then running through the teaching and program of Jesus was not God, but the kingdom of God. He made it central to his teaching, and it was the heartbeat of his life, his constant concern and preoccupation. And many of his followers and fellow Jews hoped for the restoration of the kingdom of David as the answer to the Roman occupation of their land. Adopting teachings attributed to John the Baptist, of course, they put into the mouth of Jesus, the early gospel writers, the apocalyptic description of the coming of the kingdom as a sudden, cataclysmic event. But this view was in conflict with what Jesus actually taught. He said the kingdom would come quietly and unobtrusively. People will not be able to say, "Look, here it is, over there." In actual fact, the kingdom of God is right there, within you, in your presence. So let's pose a question. To whom then does the kingdom belong? Both Augustus and Caesar Tiberius were quite clear as to whom did the kingdom belong. It belonged to them, no question. He was not offering to his disciples thrones in heaven in the afterlife, but a share in the power in the present. Jesus was inviting people to live here and now as if they were sons and daughters of their Father in heaven. And ultimately, this alternative vision of reality cost Jesus his life. And in the teaching and practice of Jesus, the kingdom belongs to the little ones, the poor, the children, women, fishermen, peasants, householders, the diseased, the blind, the outcast, the blatant sinner, the demon-possessed, and the outcasts. And such a new vision of society clearly challenged and sounded like a threat to those in charge of the old order. Embracing this new order meant that the old one had to go. and with it their cosy positions in the alcoves of power and privilege. Consequently, Jesus found himself in serious trouble with all of the elites of his time. And both the ultimate arrival of the kingdom and its present availability to those who have eyes to see it and ears to hear it is a threat to those who are in power. Men of power, and they were mainly men, have no desire to hasten then the kingdom of God. Let's put it into the future, and all the little people can go back to performing their roles in the wealth production system of society that benefits us, the privileged few. Many women, of course, find the term kingdom of God alien and oppressive, particularly female theologians. And many educated people today readily see the archaic imperialism which inherently belongs to such language and the imagery that it provokes. As several philosophers have suggested, language dictates and limits consciousness, and a new language is often necessary to move us into new directions and new possibilities. We have discovered that, of course, in the progressive Christian movement. So let's get rid of the kingdom of God. But what do we replace it with? John Dominic Crossan has a suggestion. He prefers this: a companionship of empowerment. This is certainly what all the parables are pointing towards, and even Professor Harvey Cox from Yale University prefers the term the reigning of God rather than the kingdom of God. However, the companionship of empowerment also challenges the competitive individualism so prevalent in our time and so alien to the time and culture of Jesus. The empowerment envisaged in the life and ministry of Jesus is that of setting relationships right, co-creating communities and networks through which we incarnate transformative justice, healing and forgiveness, empowering love and enduring liberation. The countercultural call is not that we look to others to do it for us, but that we mutual empower each other to do it together, for each other and for this earth that we inherit. So let's ditch the language of the kingdom of God and replace it with the companionship of empowerment. And let's not wait for scholars and synod to do it for us. We are simply seeking to reclaim something closer to the original message of Jesus that all Christians are invited to embrace, because the companionship of empowerment is within each one of us. And our blessing. And this is the blessing that was used by Martin Luther King Jr.